Hello and welcome to one of those interviews on ViewSource Speakers live sessions with a few behind the scenes about the speakers and the sessions and the talks and the interesting topics. And I'm very happy and honored to have Kenji Baheux with us today from Google, currently living in Japan, in Tokyo, Japan. How are you doing today, Kenji?
I'm pretty good, thank you.
Fantastic. I have questions. I'm always do. I have too many questions, I believe, but I'm pretty curious because I know that you spent quite a bit of time, and one of the sessions you're going to speak about, you're going to present it. Wow, it's not my day today. You're going to present it in ViewSource. It's all about multicultural web thing, right? It's like the web beyond the scope of what we're used to. And very often when we think about designing a building for the web, we're thinking about designing a building for our web, for wonderful screens and wonderful devices and wonderful connections and powerful devices and all of that. But when we think about designing for Indonesia, when we think about designing for Southeast Asia or India or kind of all places that we're not familiar with, we have stereotypes, right? We tend to believe slow devices, unreliable connections, bad screens, horrible conditions, almost the opposite of what we're used to. Is it the true web outside of the comfortable bubble that we live in? Tell us.
So, unfortunately, there is some truth to that. And the interesting thing is that the market in India and Indonesia, they have like common aspects, but there are differences. And especially around connectivity, for instance. It used to be the case that connectivity in India was very expensive. And so people wanted to save data, and so they didn't want to use the web too much, for instance. Today, it has become a lot more affordable. And so people are not concerned too much about data consumption. It is still true that maybe in the newer kind of user segment, it might still be quite expensive, but it's getting better quite fast. So I think in terms of data usage, it's not so much a concern anymore. But at the same time, 4G is available over there. But if you look at the speed and the reliability of the connection, it's more kind of like a 3G connection than a 4G connection. And so you need to be careful about your assumption about 4G is affordable and therefore the connectivity is going to be the same than what I experienced in my home country. There are some stats, but for instance, I think India is actually at the bottom in terms of speed for 4G, and it's about 10x slower than what it should be compared to the top one, for instance. So there is some nuance to have there, and also because there are a lot of users in India, depending on the time of the day, the speed will fluctuate, and also sometimes the bandwidth just doesn't keep up, and so you might lose connection. You might be on the go. There is a lot of dark points, not enough antennas and things like that. So you really need to be careful about speed, and also this idea that an always-on connectivity is not always what user experience over there. And if you contrast that to Indonesia is doing a bit better in terms of speed. 4G over there is more kind of 4G. And there are some reasons to that. The country is much smaller, urbanization is much higher, and so it does help, right? The user you can reach out in Indonesia tend to have better infrastructure. So that's one aspect. And you mentioned also the devices. So on that, it's still very true that the devices tend to be on the lower end of the spectrum. And so iPhone, for instance, are a very tiny market share, mostly because those devices are too expensive. And so most of the people can't afford to get high premium devices. It used to be the case also that the memory that those devices have is very low. And this has become better, but it doesn't mean that the device is great, right? I think the OEMs understood what the user care about. Does it have a great camera? Does it have enough RAM? What about the storage? But then they want to keep the price low, and so they are going to find ways to make the device cheap, right? And so it means slow CPU, slow storage, and things like that. So you need to be careful about the connectivity, but also how much JavaScript you send, because it's going to make your page go slow, right?
It's you spend quite a bit of time thinking about performance, and also now because you're working at the Chrome team and you kind of want to work on the instant loading team, if I'm correct, right? And
Yes.
it means, for me personally, it means that you have very different challenges at times as well, because probably now living in Japan or living in Indonesia, you kind of have to really look into the types of devices that people are using, the habits that they have, the cultural ways of how the web is different. If you look into Africa, for example, I'm sure as you probably know, of course, many people in Africa will be using kind of totally bypassing credit cards altogether, sending my money via SMS and having a different kind of web applications, right? So that makes me think as well, when it comes to performance, obviously we want to make things fast and all of that. Would you say that progressive web apps as a model has become or is becoming more and more established just because it's kind of an easy way in to get to better performance in India and Southeast Asia and so on?
Yeah, we've seen a tremendous success with PWA in those markets for the reason that I've outlined, right? If you build a PWA right, it's going to minimize the amount of data that you fetch, right? You can use the cache storage API to make sure that you don't overfetch. You can also deliver a very fast experience by showing at least a bit of like a piece of UX and then fetching the new content, right? You can minimize the amount of content you need to fetch in order to show the latest data. So I think it's a great fit. It does help a lot of partners over there.
Um, Many companies that I kind of work with, or some of my colleagues are working with, they have a very difficult time moving the kind of exploring new markets, moving their architecture, their application, the way they build up their app or the website really onto these markets, kind of trying to gather that market share. And it's very often not very clear why is that. Is it just because the architecture that we're used to with this amount, like almost a mountain of JavaScript that we're pushing with the Western world, let's say, it's just totally unacceptable for Southeast Asia. And again, I don't know, China is a difficult story anyway, India. So in many ways, many of these companies see as one of the paths to get to those markets is just build something entirely different. So if you see, let's say, somebody who is maybe watching this session later, trying to get to those markets, would you recommend to adapt the existing architecture, try to kind of make it work for those markets, or would you say it's better to start from scratch and use something like an existing ecosystem that's already there?
Yeah, I think it's usually better to start from scratch because you might be tempted to try to keep around like different features because maybe you've seen them doing well in your market, and so you think those will be like super important to have, and so it's going to be hard to make some trade-off. And so it might be better to start from scratch and like really find, okay, what are the key, what is the goal of this product? What are we trying to achieve? And keep it to the essential and start from there and see if you reduce like your product to its bare minimum, like how fast can it load on like connectivity that you can find in markets like that. Like trying to get like a low-end device. It's not too hard to get like something that could feel relevant for the market that you are trying to target, and just play with it, right? I think trying to like create a product on your like desktop computer or even looking at it like on an iPhone or like a high-end Android device is not going to give you a good idea of like what the experience is going to be. And so you need to really like put yourself in the shoes of your customers and really like confirm for yourself that what you have is going to work. So yeah, start from something very simple, like the bare minimum that your product is about, and see how far you can take it from there.
Right, and it's interesting that we are also talking about people, but also most of the time when we have these conversations about performance, we think about devices. And when you start thinking about internationalization, localization, and all those things, actually just going to those markets, I start wondering about the habits of people. Maybe they use the web very differently. So this is exactly what you're saying, right? You need to do some research to understand how people are used to certain things. What would work? Maybe a feature you spent 2 years on here in Germany somewhere is just not going to work at all in India, right? So because I mean, I just have to ask you because I'm so curious. It's maybe not on the technical side, but I'm just curious. So if you compare the web, how people use the web, let's say in the Western world, and again, let's say in Japan, where you spent the last 20 years, I believe, how is it different? I mean, I'm sure that there are certain things that are just totally confusing for somebody who experiences, let's say, the way people are using the web in Japan coming from very different culture. Did you have any kind of cultural shocks or anything of that kind? Or do you see
Yeah,
things
that's
differently?
that's an interesting one. I think one of the most surprising thing for me when I arrived in Japan like 20 years ago was the fact that the website were like very visual to the point of like being very noisy. Like from a European viewpoint, it's kind of like, oh, this is way too much in your face. Like there is so much going on that page. How can you like even understand how to use it? But actually, this is what like most users actually here like would like in terms of like user experience. They want to know more upfront about the product, and so you end up with those like long page detailing all the things about why this product is like the most amazing thing in the world. And then at the bottom of it, there is like finally a way to purchase that product. So that's one typical like user experience that I've seen a couple of times already. So yeah, so that's very visual, trying to put as much information up front about what the product is about. So that's for Japan. And then for countries like Indonesia and India, especially India, there is a lot of like difficulties around language. Um, like as you probably like know, India has a lot of like official languages, and so you really need to understand which users you are trying to reach. Because if you don't have the content in their language, it's going to be very hard for them to understand how to use the website and so on. And also, most of the users are actually like for them, it's the first time that they are getting online, and there are still a lot of like new users getting online every day, and so they don't have any like notion of like what a tab is, like background tab, all of those things that we take for granted. Like a lot of users actually, that's their first time that they're online, and so it's very hard for them to just like know the things we take for granted. And so like be very careful about like making sure that your product is like self-explaining. There is nothing that people need to know in advance, for instance.
Right. Mm, I'm also wondering, very often when we're building products or when we're designing products, we tend to think that we are building this technology that's almost neutral. But in the end, whenever we're building something, we always reflect our identity somehow in the little snippets of JavaScript and CSS we're writing. And so I think that in many ways, as designers and developers, we also have certain stereotypes when it comes to designing for those markets or kind of adapting for those markets. So what do you see? And I mean, I mentioned one of them in the very beginning, like everything is slow, everything is horrible, totally unreliable, and all of that. What do you see maybe as other common misconceptions or myths surrounding global web from people who are designing and building in a Western world web?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think one particular aspect is the local players tend to be much more successful for various reasons. But one of them is that they, especially in Indonesia, um, they know that the population is like very young in general, and so they opt for a more casual tone, which is something that I guess most websites in the US and EU don't tend to do a lot. And so if you're on e-commerce, you might be tempted to be like very serious, like because you want to present yourself as like a company that people can trust, but it might actually be detrimental to your brand image if you go to a market like Indonesia, where people want to have like a more fun experience, maybe.
Right. And also, if you look forward into how things are evolving or how they've changed, I mean, you've seen tremendous change on the web over the last 20 years, I'm sure. Um, but I'm wondering also, when we look forward, let's say 5 years from now,
Mhm.
and look into connectivity, it seems like there is this gap that we used to have. It's kind of bridging. We have pretty much stable connectivity that's coming, at least worldwide. It's still a long way to go, but it's it's coming. Do you see how do you see the web, the World Wide Web, as we intended to be from the very first place, evolving? Will we breach all these gaps between Western world and non-Western world, at least in terms of the web,
Yeah.
or are
So
there going to be
obviously,
significant cultural differences still?
eventually, like things will get in a similar like place in terms of like connectivity and like maybe even like devices. But I think it's going to take a while because, as I said, there is still a lot of like new users getting online for the first time, and for them it's like the price of like data and devices are getting in the affordable like realm. And you see, especially in markets like India, for instance, there is still a lot of like feature phone, and it's not the like the old style feature phone. It's kind of like a more full-fledged feature phone. I believe that KaiOS is getting like a lot of like attraction. People should be aware of that brand. Like go check it online, like Google for KaiOS devices, and you will see that it's actually bringing the like modern web into a feature phone form factor. And so the idea is that the lowest end of the smartphone is still too expensive for a lot of users. And so by bringing something that people can use and get connected to on a feature phone form factor, like carriers can lower the price point where a lot more users can get online. So I think this is still going to be the case for a long time. And so having to be mindful about low-end devices, slow connectivity, because as more people get online, the infrastructure like should keep up, but it's going to be very hard. All of those problems are still going to be a thing for a long time, I think.
When I was in Indonesia, by the way, I was surprised about one thing because it's the first time when I experienced it, and it was the fact that I would go online and would get a SIM card, and then there would be a Facebook internet and everything else. Essentially,
Mhm.
whenever I go through the gates of Facebook and I try to, going to click on the links and all, then it's free. But then as long as I want to, type in anything else in my URL bar, I have to
Mhm.
pay. So this is where I actually got to be hit almost by the role that net neutrality has and how it's actually not respected really in those countries where you have to pay more for accessing certain parts of the web.
Yeah.
In terms of net neutrality, how do you see things there? Because it's only been to Indonesia where it happened to me. Is it a common thing that you have a Facebook internet in many places around the world?
So I believe this is part of the something that was called Facebook Basics. I don't know if it's still the same name, but I've seen different countries where you can get online for free, but you only have access to a few websites. And I'm just guessing that it's a deal between those websites and a carrier. And what we like the stats that we have indicate that it only gets like a lot of people would just move away from that very soon, like quickly, because as they get to hear from their friend and family about all the different things that they are able to do, they quickly realize that what they have is like very limited. And so as their purchasing power like grows, they do like pay a few additional like quota, not maybe for the full months, and eventually at some point they will be able to do so. But there is an appetite for like getting beyond those like few websites that are available for free.
And then maybe the final one, Kenji, and I will let you go and free.
All right.
So, if you look forward, let's say in a few years from now, and maybe you look back into that interview when I asked that question, what would you like to see changed in the next 2 years? Is there anything on the web that you desperately want to fix, or something that kind of bothers you for quite a bit of time, where you are spending all your time and effort, and you're in the nighttime when you can't sleep, just to solve that thing? If you could solve just one thing for good on the web, what would it be?
That's a tough one. I feel that the web in general is still like we say that the web is like very low friction, and it is in a sense because everything is just like one link away, and so and also there's like no install phase. It's very safe and secure, right? But at the same time, like on mobile, it's a lot of time it's very frustrating because you have to wait. The page load very slowly. The UX is not always great. So I hope that the work we do will eventually get us in a place where the web feel like instant and seamless and delightful. Um, And I'm wondering if there is something that is missing, which is some of the native apps are on general do provide a better user experience, because I feel they have the incentive to do so through things like ratings and reviews, right? There is a way to know where you are falling off the path, like what is wrong about my app, how can I fix it? And also you have the incentive to do it because there is rankings and people can see what other people think about your app. And so I'm wondering if there is something on the web that is missing there where we could get more signals from users and help the web get better based on that. And so I would like to get some feedback on that, what people think about this idea.
Oh, that sounds exciting. So I guess that maybe that's something you'll bring up in your session on October 1st at QSource in Amsterdam. And I can't wait to hear more insights about the web in different parts of the world, because the web is much bigger than just us sitting here in fancy offices in front of wonderful displays. All right, Kenji, thank you so much for being with us today, and thanks to everyone for watching as well. And I'm looking forward to the next one, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in Amsterdam. Thank you, Kenji. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.